I wasn't always this quiet. Years ago, my laughter could fill a house, light, steady, the kind that made even silence feel like company. But life has a way of dimming the volume, doesn't it? My name's Teresa. I gave everything I had to raise my boy right. Worked overtime shifts, skipped new shoes, smiled through sore feet and sleepless nights. There were so many nights I stayed up just listening for his breath, praying I could give him a future better than mine. They say motherhood is sacrifice. I lived that word, not in some noble, poster-on-the-wall kind of way, but in the daily choices, the quiet no's to myself so I could say yes to him. He never asked me to. Kids never do. But that's the job. I kept us afloat when the world wanted to drown me. No partner, no backup plan. Just me and a bank account that always hovered on empty. And still, I never once let him feel the weight of it. I thought we were a team. Maybe that sounds naive for a woman my age, but I really believed it. Even when the job let me go, too old, too slow, too kind, I thought he'd have my back. I told myself, we've built this life together. We'll weather this too. After all, the house we live in? My name might not be on the deed, but half that down payment came from my savings, from my sacrifices, from me. But things shift. People shift. It started with glances, quick little sighs when I walked into a room. Conversations that ended the second I entered. And one night, God, I can still hear his voice. He looked at me and said, "Mom, we need space. You need to figure things out on your own." Just like that. No warning, no warmth. My son, my baby, told me to pack my things and go. And I did. Quietly. With a single suitcase and a heart full of questions no one would answer. I didn't argue, didn't cry in front of them. I folded my clothes slowly, one by one, like if I took long enough, maybe he'd change his mind. But he didn't. Neither did she, my daughter-in-law. She just watched from the hallway, arms crossed, like I was some unwanted guest who'd overstayed her welcome. I kept thinking, was I that invisible all along? I even left the casserole in the fridge, the one he used to love when he was little. Beef and lentils, cheap and warm, like me. There's something about leaving a house you helped build with your hands, your hope, and your heart. It's not just bricks and drywall. It's every packed lunch, every late-night worry, every whispered bedtime story. I walked out of that door with a suitcase and a silence I didn't know how to carry. No place to go, no plan, just gone. I didn't even take the family photos. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing how much it hurt. Funny thing is, it wasn't anger that filled me at first. It was shame. Deep, swallowing shame. Like I'd failed somehow. Like my usefulness had an expiration date and I was the last to read it. I spent that first night in a borrowed corner of someone's living room, staring at the ceiling and wondering who I was now that no one needed me. I kept replaying his words in my head. You need to figure things out on your own. As if I hadn't been doing that all his life. And yet somewhere between the pain and the pillows that weren't mine, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Space. Not the kind he was asking for, but a different kind. The kind that stretches between heartbreak and healing. I didn't know it then, but something inside me had already started to shift. Something small, quiet, defiant. Like the sound of a locked door clicking open in the back of your mind. I started counting things differently after that. Not in money or years, but in small victories. The way I managed to smile at the bus driver, even with my heart still in pieces. The way I folded my few shirts and made a tiny corner of someone else's couch feel a little like home. I stopped asking why he did it. The truth is, I already knew. Pride, pressure, maybe her voice in his ear, maybe his own voice telling him he was too grown to need a mother. Either way, I wasn't part of the picture anymore. And you know what hurts the most? It's not being thrown out. It's realizing how easily someone can forget what you gave up for them, how quickly they rewrite history once they've got comfort on their side. My son. He used to hug me so tight, his little fingers would dig into my back. He used to call me his hero, and now? I was a problem to be solved, a space to be cleared, a burden. That word still stings. But I didn't let it break me. Not all the way. Somewhere beneath the ache, something steadied itself. I thought about my mother, how she held our family together with nothing but grit and homemade soup. I thought about the women I used to admire from afar. Quiet warriors they were, always standing back up after being knocked down. I wondered if I had that in me too. I didn't feel strong, but maybe strength doesn't feel like anything at all. Maybe it just shows up when there's no other choice. And so I told myself, "You're not done yet, Teresa. Not by a long shot." I may have left that house with nothing but a suitcase, but I carried something else with me. Something heavier than regret, but stronger than grief. A knowing that the story wasn't over. Not for me, not for him. Because the thing about being pushed out is, sometimes it puts you on a path you never would have chosen, but maybe, just maybe, it's the one you needed all along. The place I landed wasn't glamorous. Just a spare room in a retired nurse's house, small bed, peeling wallpaper, a window that stuck when you tried to open it. But it was warm, safe, and quiet in a way that didn't make me feel alone, just paused. I remember sitting on the edge of that bed my first night there, fingers laced in my lap, telling myself, "All right, Teresa, one step at a time." I didn't cry. I think I'd run out of tears. Instead, I just listened to the ticking of the old wall clock, to my breath slowly steadying itself. I started saying yes to the little things: walking dogs, babysitting a neighbor's twins, baking banana bread and selling it to folks at church. Nothing fancy, nothing that would make headlines. But it felt like moving, like I was inching forward even if no one else noticed. I'd forgotten what it felt like to earn my own again. Not for someone else's dream, but for mine. That first $20 bill I made on my own felt like a trophy. I kept it in my Bible for weeks before I spent it. And then something unexpected happened. One of the twins I watched, a sweet girl named Ava, told her mother about my stories. You see, I used to make up little fairy tales while we waited for bedtime. Turns out, her mother worked for a local tutoring network and asked if I'd ever thought about teaching. I laughed at first. Me? Teach? I hadn't been in a classroom in decades, but she saw something I hadn't seen in myself in a long, long time, so I said yes. It started with just one student, a high school girl struggling with English. I helped her with essays, sentence structure, confidence. She called me Miss Teresa after our second session and hugged me like I mattered, like I was doing something meaningful again. And that night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly. Not because things were perfect, but because something inside me whispered, "See, you're still needed." And that voice, it was louder than my son's had ever been. Bit by bit, my days started filling up. I'd wake early, light a candle, make coffee in that chipped old mug someone left behind, and open my planner with purpose. I began picking up more tutoring gigs, some in person, some online, all through word of mouth. Turns out, people still trusted women like me. The kind who showed up on time, listened with both ears, and didn't need fancy credentials to make someone feel seen. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't just surviving. I was building something, quietly, carefully. I'd bake on weekends, pies, rolls, lemon bars, and sell them at a local pop-up near the farmer's market. There was a joy in watching strangers take a bite and smile like they were tasting their own childhoods. One woman, a boutique owner named Clarice, bought a cranberry loaf and asked who made it. When I said I did, she looked at me like I was holding gold. "You ever thought about selling these wholesale?" she asked. I blinked. She wasn't joking. That tiny moment, it cracked something open inside me. Clarice gave me my first shot. She offered shelf space in her store and even helped me design a label. Nothing fancy, just Teresa's table in soft script with a tiny sunflower underneath. I'll never forget the feeling of seeing those loaves lined up like they belonged there, like I belonged there. It wasn't about the money, though that helped. It was about waking up every morning with something to pour myself into, something that was mine. And still, late at night, I'd catch myself scrolling through old photos. My son, his wife, their carefully curated smiles. But even through the filters, I could see the cracks. Posts with vague captions. Tense smiles. A new car 1 month, then silence the next. My heart would twist, not with longing, but with a strange mix of sadness and distance. I wasn't in their story anymore, but that didn't mean I wasn't watching. And slowly, without even knowing it, I started to rewrite the one they'd pushed me out of. One evening, after finishing a tutoring session, I sat down with a cup of chamomile tea and found myself smiling without realizing it. That kind of smile that comes from deep contentment, not excitement, not relief, but a steady warmth. I looked around at my little borrowed room, the stacks of books, the calendar full of names and orders, and I realized something. I had become someone else. Or maybe I'd just come back to who I was before life demanded I be everything for everyone else. I wasn't chasing approval anymore, not from my son, not from society. I was following something quieter and far more honest, my own instincts. I had nothing to prove, and yet I was accomplishing more than I ever had. My hands weren't idle. My voice wasn't ignored. I was present in every hour of my day. And strangely enough, I didn't feel old anymore. I felt possible. Like maybe there was still a whole stretch of life ahead of me with room for joy, discovery, even love. And then came the news. A friend forwarded me a photo she'd seen online. My son's wife was gone. Just gone. No announcement, no smiles, just him now, standing alone at the edge of their porch, looking thinner, smaller somehow. There were whispers of debt, of missed payments, of tension. My hands didn't shake when I saw it. My heart didn't race. I just took a breath and thought, "You're learning the hard way, aren't you, baby?" And part of me ached for him, but another part didn't. He taught me what not to expect from love. That lesson was brutal, but it gave me something better: clarity, strength, peace. And now, whether he knows it or not, he's about to learn something too. Not from a lecture, not from guilt, from me, from what I've become. Because I'm not coming back into his life the same woman he pushed out. I'm returning with more than love. I'm coming with interest. I never planned on getting even. That's not who I am. But life has a way of placing opportunities in your path when you least expect them. And sometimes those opportunities look a lot like second chances in disguise. It started with a check, a small inheritance from my cousin in Carolina. We weren't close, but she left a note that said, "For the one who always kept going." I cried when I read it. Not for the money, but for the fact that someone saw me, even from afar. I didn't run out and spend it. I let it sit. I'd learned enough by now to know that power doesn't come from what you have. It comes from what you do with it. I met with a woman Clarice recommended, a financial planner named June who wore pantsuits and smelled like eucalyptus. She talked to me like I was someone with a future. We made a plan: investments, legal protections, quiet moves. I wasn't chasing attention. I was building something no one could take from me this time. While I worked, I watched. My son, well, his fall was slow but public. Job gone, house listed, credit shot. He tried to keep up appearances online, but the shine had dulled. That perfect little life they built on borrowed time was crumbling from the inside. And all the while, I stayed in my lane. I sold my bread, I tutored, I grew, and I kept an eye on one listing in particular, that house. The one I once called home. The one they made me leave without so much as a thank you. When it went up for sale, I didn't hesitate. I called June. We put in an offer through a shell company with a quiet name. No parades, no drama, just paperwork and wire transfers. I bought the house my own son had thrown me out of. And I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, like I had finished a long, painful chapter and finally turned the page. I didn't need revenge. I had something better. I had the keys. The first time I drove past the house again, I stayed in the car. It looked smaller than I remembered. The porch where I used to sip coffee, now sagging a little. The rosebush I planted years ago was gone. Dug up, maybe, or just left to die. I didn't feel bitter. Just disconnected. Like a ghost passing by her old life. I parked half a block away and watched as a for rent sign was hammered into the front lawn. I rolled the window down, let the wind touch my face, and whispered, "You'll be mine again soon. Just wait." June handled everything. She was meticulous, made sure the name on the deed had nothing to do with me. Legally, emotionally, it was sealed tight. When the papers cleared, I walked through that front door for the first time in years. Alone, no fanfare. Just me and the echo of everything I'd once given up. The floors creaked the same. The kitchen still smelled like lemon polish and something else I couldn't name. Memory, maybe. I stood in the living room and ran my hand along the wall where his baby height had been penciled in, now painted over. I didn't move in. That wasn't the point. I fixed things. Replaced the broken tiles, had the heating redone, planted new flowers in the front yard. Daisies this time, not roses. Roses are beautiful, but they bleed when you touch them. Daisies just keep growing. I made the place whole again, not because I needed it to be, but because I wanted it ready. For what, I didn't yet know. Maybe closure, maybe more. Then came the call. A rental inquiry. A man looking for a room, recently divorced, temporarily unemployed. I recognized the voice before the message even finished playing. My son. My baby boy, now grown and frayed at the edges, looking for shelter. I sat there with the phone in my lap for a long time before I said a word. Then I smiled, slow and certain, and said, "Yes, the room is available." He didn't recognize my voice. I kept it steady, professional. Told him the landlord preferred everything in writing, that he'd be meeting with a representative. I created a new email account. Signed documents with a name that wasn't mine. Watched him agree to every term without question. That part stung more than I expected. The ease with which he accepted help from a stranger. How quickly he leaned on someone else when it had taken everything in me just to ask for space years ago. The day he moved in, I wasn't there. I left the keys in a lockbox, sent instructions through the app. June had someone handle the handoff, clean, distant, impersonal. I didn't want drama. I wanted distance. From the version of myself that used to wait at that door with homemade stew and a smile, hoping to be thanked. I was no longer that woman. I was the one holding the deed. He didn't know it, but every corner of that house held a piece of me. The floorboards still whispered my name. The cabinets still stuck the way they always had. The back bedroom, the one he was renting now, used to be my sanctuary when he was little. I wondered if he'd noticed the way the sunlight hit the walls at 4 p.m., or the creak in the hallway right outside the door, where I used to stand, listening, when he cried as a child and didn't want me to know. Now he was back, not as a son returning home, but as a tenant, desperate, smaller, humbled. And while part of me wanted to reach out, to hold his face in my hands and remind him who he used to be, another part stayed quiet. Because sometimes the best lessons begin in silence, and I wasn't done teaching. I kept my distance at first. Watched him through reports and messages like a landlord would. He paid rent on time, asked few questions. He even fixed a broken light bulb in the hallway without being asked. That part surprised me. He used to walk past broken things like they weren't his to fix. Now, he kept his head down, stayed polite, quiet. It wasn't the arrogance I remembered. It was a different man. Not better, not worse, just different, dented. I visited the house while he was at work, left things in small doses. A teacup from my old collection in the kitchen cabinet, a throw pillow I used to keep on the couch. Nothing obvious, nothing he could point at and say, "This is hers." But the house knew, and I wanted it to remember. One day, I planted marigolds along the fence line. They were my mother's favorite. He wouldn't know that, but I'd know. And sometimes, that's enough. I kept wondering when, if, he'd notice. I wasn't looking for a grand confrontation. I didn't want anger or tears. I wanted awareness. I wanted him to stop and feel the presence he'd tried to erase. The house wasn't just walls and furniture. It was memory, effort, sacrifice. All the things I'd once poured into it, piece by piece. And now? I was pouring them back in, only this time it was on my terms. He started asking questions in small ways. Where did this chair come from? Did someone fix the squeaky step? I kept my answers vague, relayed through the management email. The landlord made improvements, I wrote, just making the place feel like home again. And I meant it. Not for him. For me. For the girl I used to be when I first stepped into that house full of hope. I was setting the table for something, and I think part of him knew something was coming. There's a certain power in being invisible. Not in the way they made me feel before. Not discarded. No. This kind of invisibility was deliberate, controlled. I chose to be unseen so I could see everything. I knew when he left in the mornings, what kind of music he played in the evenings. Sometimes I'd hear him through the walls, pacing, talking low to himself. There was no laughter anymore, no wife, no friends coming by. Just silence, and the weight of it pressing on his shoulders. I found a photo in the back closet one afternoon, one I'd forgotten existed. Him and me, years ago. He was maybe 8, covered in chocolate cake, hugging me like he never wanted to let go. I nearly dropped it. My hands trembled just holding that moment. I placed it on the hallway table, by the mirror. Not front and center, just there, casual. I wanted to see if he'd notice. The next time I checked, it had been turned face down. Not taken, not thrown out, just avoided. He knew. I was sure of it then. Maybe he didn't know the how, but he felt it. The return of something he thought was gone. And I watched him carry it, not with grace, not yet, but with guilt clinging to the edges. It showed up in the way he lingered in the kitchen longer, the way he looked at the photos on the wall as if they might answer something he couldn't ask aloud. He wasn't arrogant anymore, but he wasn't remorseful either. He was broken, and not the kind of broken that begs for healing, the kind that resists it. And that's when I knew the time was near. I didn't want him to suffer. That's not what this was. I just needed him to sit with the ache of absence. To understand what it feels like when someone who made your life possible disappears from it. To notice what was missing. And only then, when the silence started pressing questions into his chest, could I offer him the truth. The whole truth. But I wouldn't hand it over easily. He'd have to face it, like a mirror, like a weight, like the echo of a door he once closed. The letter was the last clue. Handwritten, folded twice. Left in the drawer beside the bed, right where I used to keep my journals. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. Just a few lines, simple, almost gentle. This house remembers who built it. So should you. I knew it would shake him. That kind of truth always does. When you think the past is buried and it knocks softly at your door, it's never just a visit, it's a reckoning. It took him 2 days. I imagined the moment he unfolded it, standing in that room with the window that creaks, the room I once cried in when he was at school and I couldn't afford groceries. I pictured his face, that flicker of realization, anger, maybe, shame, maybe even fear. When you've hurt someone and never looked back, you never expect them to rise again, let alone do it quietly, with grace and full control of the keys. He called. Not the management number this time, my number. The one he hadn't used in over a year. My heart thudded when I saw his name, but I didn't pick up. Not yet. I needed him to sit with the knowing, to feel what it's like when someone has the power to answer, and chooses not to. I wasn't playing games. I was drawing a boundary, the kind he never saw before, the kind that says you don't get to skip the part where you face yourself. He knocked on the front door the next evening, knocked like a stranger, soft, unsure, careful. I watched from the kitchen window for a moment before stepping forward. He didn't see me right away, and when he finally did, I saw it in his eyes. Not just surprise, not just confusion, but the flicker of a boy who once trusted me, and the man who had to live with the choice to cast me out. He opened his mouth to speak, but I was already walking toward him. Ready. Calm. Holding not a grudge, but the ending he never saw coming. He asked the question like he already knew the answer, but needed to hear it anyway. Why would you do this? His voice cracked on the last word, like it surprised him. I stood in the doorway, hands relaxed, heart steady. And I said it, without flinching, without spite. Because you threw me out of the house I helped build. Now you'll pay to live in it. I watched the words land, heavy and slow, and he blinked, as if they knocked something loose inside him. He didn't speak for a moment. Just looked around, as if the walls would confirm it, as if the floor would whisper she's right. I didn't press him, didn't gloat. That's not what this was about. This wasn't revenge. This was reality, served warm and quiet. He finally sat down on the edge of the couch, the one I had reupholstered myself, and rested his head in his hands. I didn't know what I was doing, he mumbled. We were overwhelmed. I thought... But he didn't finish. Because even now, he wasn't ready to admit what he'd done. I sat across from him, not beside him, across, with space between us like the space he'd once created. You don't need to explain, I said. I already know. And I did. I knew the ways life can twist your priorities, how pride can disguise itself as independence, how people sometimes push away what reminds them of their own weakness. He wasn't evil. He was lost. And the truth is, I didn't want him to grovel. I wanted him to grow. Not for me, for himself. You're not being evicted, I said, more gently now. But you're not living here for free either. There will be rent. There will be rules. You'll do repairs. You'll mow the lawn. You'll volunteer at the shelter on Sundays. He lifted his head, surprised. Why? He asked again. But this time it sounded different. Less like a challenge. More like a child asking to understand. I smiled, but not with softness, with purpose. Because this house raised you once, I said. Maybe this time, it can teach you how to be a man. He nodded slowly, but I could see the hesitation in his eyes, the kind of hesitation that comes when a man realizes he's no longer in control of the narrative. For so long, he had the upper hand. Youth, independence, the illusion of knowing better. And now here he was, being offered a roof he once called his, but only if he was willing to earn it. Not through money alone, but humility, contribution, responsibility. The very things he once thought he'd outgrown. I handed him a list. Tasks, expectations, hours. Nothing cruel, just the kind of structure I knew he'd never build for himself. You'll find purpose in the doing, I told him. Not the comfort. The comfort comes after. He ran his fingers over the paper like it might burn him. You really mean this, he said, almost to himself. You really want me to stay? I met his eyes. I want you to become someone worth staying. That's different. For a moment, The silence between us softened. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it wasn't resentment either. It was something new, a fragile kind of grace. He stood, unsure of what to do with his hands. "What if I mess it up?" he asked. His voice was barely above a whisper. I thought about lying, telling him it would be easy, that he'd get it right on the first try. But I didn't. "You will," I said. "That's part of it." Growth doesn't come from perfection. It comes from failing in the right direction. That night, I walked through the house alone, barefoot, the way I used to when it was still full of noise and dreams. I touched the walls. I smiled at the new dishes in the sink. I even paused by his bedroom door, the one I used to push open after nightmares, the one he now closed more gently. He was in there, breathing deeply, trying to sleep under the weight of a life he was learning to carry again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something like peace begin to rise in my chest. The days became routine, but not in the way they used to be. There was no performance, no pretending, just real work. I'd hear him in the mornings, dragging the garbage to the curb, hammering loose boards, cooking simple meals, and actually washing the dishes after. It wasn't magical, it wasn't fast. But I saw the change. Not in grand gestures, but in the way he lingered longer in the garden, or paused before speaking, or asked me, genuinely, how my day was. Those questions used to come with a sigh. Now they came with eyes that waited for the answer. One afternoon I came home to find him on the porch steps, hands dirtied from planting. Daisies, my daisies, lined the walkway. He didn't say a word as I approached, just gave a small nod, as if to say, "I know now." I sat beside him. The silence between us wasn't tense anymore. It was full, like soil after rain. He finally turned to me and said, "I didn't understand what love looked like when it wasn't easy." I placed my hand over his, firm and steady. "Now you do." And I meant it. Because love isn't just warmth and praise. Sometimes it's boundaries. Sometimes it's letting someone fall and not rushing to catch them. Sometimes love is saying, "You hurt me," and still offering a place to begin again. I never wanted to punish him. I wanted him to see me, to see himself, to understand what's required of someone who wants to build a home, not just live in one. As the sun dipped behind the trees that evening, casting long shadows across the porch, I looked at the house, our house, the one that broke me and then helped me rebuild. It had stood through storms, silence, and the slow return of grace. And as I turned to go back inside, I whispered the words I hadn't said aloud in years. "Welcome home." Because this house raised him once. Maybe this time it can teach him how to be a man.